5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to the SF in Translation podcast. I'm Rachel Cordasco and I have a very special guest today, Julia Meitov Hersey, who translated Vida Nostra by Marina and Sergei Dyachenko, and that came out last year from Harper Voyager. It is an amazing, what do we even call it, a psychological horror fantasy?
Oh gosh, it's been classified as Bildungsroman. It's been classified as horror, psychological fiction. It's just been all over the place. I think it really depends on how people are reading it. I think of it as a family drama, but I think I'm in the minority probably.
No, I think that's, I mean, it defies genre categories.
And I think there's just so many layers to it that every person who reads it a little bit differently. I think that's the beauty of this book, that it's just very multi-layered and very complex.
Yes. And I told you, a long time ago that I wrote a review of it.
Which is already awesome because it's not easy. This is not an easy book to write a review about.
I put so much effort into it, and it still hasn't come out yet. So
I can't wait.
It'll come out. But anyway, so I definitely want to talk about Vida Nostra, but first I wanted to ask you, as a native Russian speaker, what your experience was learning English and how your ability to move between Russian and English has influenced, everything, basically how you read, how you write, and how you translate.
It influences all those things, and it influences how I think and who I talk to and all this. It's a really strange position to be in. I came to the States when I was 19, so I was on that sort of weird line between childhood and adulthood. So my native language is definitely Russian, and I did have a couple of random lessons in English, but I never really learned it until I came here. So I learned it from watching TV, and to this day, watching TV with subtitles is the way I recommend people to learn any kind of foreign language if they can't just go out and talk to people. Watching TV with subtitles is still the best way. But that's how I learned. So every time a grammatical question comes up, I'm a little hazy. So
Me too.
Well,
I don't know.
Good. I'm not the only one. But I definitely don't have this strong linguistic approach to language. So a lot of what the way I function is really saying things out loud and figuring out if it sounds right or not. But it definitely gives me this constant pressure of not quite ever being sure in either language at this point. So I'm a terrible example of a bilingual person because I'm constantly doubting myself no matter which language I'm speaking. So it's a lot of pressure actually that I put on myself. But at the same time, I've been here long enough to consider English really my native language at this point. My Russian is very archaic. I can definitely understand everything and I can speak it, but there's a lot of the language changes that happened since I left, a lot. And a lot of idioms have changed, so I don't have the active knowledge of it anymore. No matter how much I read, it's still not there because I don't live there anymore.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Because, so when you came here, was it the 80s?
It was 1990. Yeah.
1990. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Because, I mean, you would think to me and maybe to you, the 1990s seem like yesterday, but, that is, 30 years ago.
It was a long time ago. I know. Well, thank you for pointing that out.
You are welcome.
Better things.
I know.
But and the country I'm from technically doesn't even exist anymore. So of course the language has changed tremendously. So every time I read a Russian novel, a contemporary Russian novel, or watch a contemporary Russian film, there are things that I've never heard before linguistically.
That's fascinating. And, I think I told you when we met at ReaderCon, or when we saw each other at ReaderCon, that, I took Russian for 2 years, and it was, it was amazing. I really enjoyed it. I stopped just before we got to like the really hard grammar. But at one point it was just me and one other, kid and our professor. And we would just have lots of, conversations, but I was nowhere near fluent, but I was kind of getting the rhythm of it. I was starting to be able to read it kind of quickly. And, I kind of know certain kind of grammatical structures of it. So, I see anything is translated from Russian, and I think, wow, if I had taken a little more,
Well, and it's just like in Vita Nostra, when Sasha studies so hard and nothing makes sense, and then suddenly things just kind of begin to emerge. It's that process, and I always think of it as learning a language, what she's going through. We've all gone through this, all of us who are learning another language or have learned something else. It's that same process, and that's why, to me, it's not about the psychological horror so much, or not about the wings or the claws or whatever. It's about this process of things just kind of coming together and the beauty of it. And not everybody gets to that point. And if you do, it's just amazingly rewarding. Not unlike parenthood,
Yeah, well, yes.
When you put so much work into this, and then finally they sort of begin to emerge.
Right. And then they say bye and leave.
Right, yes. Yeah, but, what can we do?
Yeah, that is so right, that it is like learning a language, because, I've been on the cusp of being, mildly fluent, like in a couple different languages.
Well, you have Italian, right?
Italian, yeah, I can read it, but I can't carry on the fluent conversation, but
you can translate and you can appreciate the beauty of the language, so.
Yes. Yeah, I love it. Because I studied French for so long, the Italian, I recognize a lot of things. And, Italian, it kind of, if you've read a lot of British, 19th century British novels, or like early 20th century American novels, and kind of the Latinate words, there's so much of Italian that it's just like, the word is from Latin, like, what it is in English. It just might have like a slightly different, more colloquial
flavor or nuance. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm reading it going, this is like almost English. It's, or English is like almost Italian, and it definitely has that flavor, like in Vita Nostra, where she's just reading these paragraphs and they make no sense. And then they do.
Suddenly, oh my God, I know. And it's so beautiful. And the weird part is that it has this physical effect on her, because like the librarian finds her, slumped down, and she's completely almost dead from this exhaustion and this whatever euphoric moment that she's experiencing. Meanwhile, I'm translating it and my heart rate goes up, and I just had to like walk away a couple of times. And it does have a physical effect on the translator. And I've been told on the readers as well.
Yes, because I had to have like a few days to recover.
Yeah, it really hurts to read this book.
Yeah.
It's painful. I know.
It reminded me of the surrealism that you see in some China medieval books, like Embassy Town and Perdido's Street Station, where like, yeah, people have wings, or creatures have wings, and they like fly, and it's kind of like, like that's weird, but it makes total sense.
Right, and it's also not the point. It's just a flavor, right?
It's not the point, right? It's just a thing. Yeah, it's just like, yeah, he's got wings, whatever.
To me, it's been compared to quite a few things. Of course, the Harry Potter comparison and the magicians, and it's all very true. But I always thought of it as very similar to the Magus, John Fowles' The Magus, where all these weird things are happening and you have no idea what's going on, and it's sort of kind of supernatural, but maybe not. Maybe it's staged, and maybe it's just hallucinations, and you don't ever quite know what's happening. But at the end, it's really about a very simple human emotion. And that's what drives everything, and all the supernatural and the setup and the staging and the play acting, none of it really matters. It's all about love and jealousy and the ability to commit. So all those very simple human emotions.
Yeah, and like you said, it's like a coming of age story because she is at that absolutely like most impressionable point in her life.
Right, very fragile, very easily wounded, absolutely.
Yeah, and when you're like you're like, oh my God, like I actually have to make a decision about my life that could change the direction of my entire life. Do I go to this place? Do I not? Why is this guy following me? And that
was actually one of the really interesting points that when I was reading it and translating it, certain things seemed so obvious to me. Like, of course, she has to make a decision where to go to school at 17 and commit to something, and essentially declare her major and be in this job in this field for the rest of her life. And to my absolutely brilliant American editor, it was a question like, why does she have to do that? Doesn't she have time to kind of think it through? And that was one of those things that were so obvious to me, and we had to kind of go back and rethink the phrasing of certain things a little bit and just put a little bit more, we didn't change anything, but just put a little bit more of a justification into the text. It's a cultural difference, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting because see, my mom and I had long conversations with my Russian piano teacher, who I was with for years.
Of course you had a Russian piano teacher.
Of course I did. He was from St. Petersburg, and he gave me all my music. Everything was in Russian, like the titles, like, the names of the composers, like all the directions, everything was in Russian. And I would stare at it constantly, not knowing what it said. So, it's like I'm living Vita Nostra here. But he would tell us, because he was just one of the nicest people, and he would stand there and he would talk to us about the fact that, you were little and, they were like, okay, what are you going to be? Are you going to be like a musician? Are you going to be, and, he was put in a conservatory at like 10.
Oh, it's kind of late. It was probably more like 5.
Okay, maybe 5.
Yeah. 10 is, you're done. You're so overage, it doesn't matter.
Right, and he rarely, he didn't get to see his parents that much, and he said one time he was eating lunch. I mean, he was I guess a teenager. He was eating lunch in, the cafeteria, and his teacher came by and was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm eating."
But it's 20 minutes you could be practicing. Right?
Why aren't you practicing? Right. So when I was reading this and I was, okay, this is written in Russian. It's a story about about this girl who has to make a decision. And this actually is kind of late for her because, she's like 16. But yes, people were expected to just,
Right. Well, music and sports are a little different because people did have to make that decision for their children if they had any kind of potential. That's when things started at 5 and 6. But in most cases, you still had to make a decision because you applied for a certain major and that's what you went to school for. You couldn't just do this. I'm just going to go to, BU and be undeclared for a couple of years. No, you had to make that decision. And it's still the same way in Europe.
Yeah.
So it's not that unusual, but it does seem harsh to, even to me at this point, it seems a little harsh. So, my mentality has changed obviously in the last, I don't want to say how many years, even though you already
just a couple
blew that. Yeah.
So, when you're translating, my experience translating is that I've always had an email relationship with whoever I've been translating. And what I do is I'll translate, I'll send the text back to the author. They'll send it back to me with comments. We go back and forth 3 or 4 times. And, and then kind of move on from there. What was your experience translating this? Were you in contact with them?
So not with Vita Nostra, and I'm a really, really terrible example of I'm a good example of how not to do things. I I translate as a hobby, or at least did for years. And Vita Nostra was, I think it may have been the third book I translated, and then I translated like six more. So I've got a whole library of things that is just kind of sitting in my computer. But Vita Nostra I translated because, well, it didn't exist. And it blew my mind. It absolutely changed certain things for me in the way I process learning and process parenting. And it had to be translated. I was shocked that it didn't exist. And I was told by so many people that it was too complex, it was too Russian, it was too foreign, it was too weird, too scary. It was all those things
Wow.
that were, wrong, and why it could never, ever be accepted in the States. And I just did it because, I wanted to have it. And so I didn't, and then we tried to publish it, but it didn't work. It was rejected. And my wonderful agent, Josh Getzler of HSG in New York, who is literally the hero, the best person I've ever met, he just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. So eventually it took us 9 years,
Wow.
from the point I translated to publication. But in the beginning, it wasn't commissioned, and there was no contract, and the authors didn't know I exist. And once it was rejected several times, I just decided to, send it to them as a courtesy, like it's not going anywhere. They might as well have a copy. Maybe they have some English speaking friends that they could, give it to. And that's when I made the first contact with them. And Marina and Sergei are amazing in a way that they're extremely well known, very famous in Russia, and they still read every single letter that they get, which I have no idea how they find the time, but they read it and they respond. And so they responded to me and thanked me for it. And that's how this whole thing started. So at that point, I had contact with them. And when we finally got it to publication, I went back and, we went back and forth on the certain things that we had to change, because there was a big part that we did have to change. And you know how when she is learning and all these things are beginning to emerge, it's all quote based. And a lot of the quotes were from things that were not in public domain. So we went back and we had to make a decision whether to go for rights or to change it to something like Shakespeare. That was the first idea. And then we decided we were going to change it to quotes from Dichenko's other books.
Wow, that's great.
And so we went with that and, translated certain passages in the books that haven't been translated yet. But that was a big part. And of course, I needed their permission to do that.
Wow.
So that was a big legal issue that actually took quite a long time to iron out and figure out how we're going to do that. And we found passages from their other books that were sort of conceptually similar. So if a passage was reflecting fear, then we would go with something, different in plot, but similar in the emotion. So emotion of fear, or, horror, laughter, love, or whatever. And that was a huge, huge undertaking, because there's at least 20 passages in that book that we had to rework.
I didn't know where they were from.
Yeah, I think some of them have footnotes, but most of them are from Dichenko's other books.
Wow, that is because that adds a whole other layer to it. A whole other like meta-textual.
Yes. Oh, it's very meta. It's extremely meta, but it kind of made sense.
Yeah. I mean that's a good. I mean, were they like? Was this kind of like, oh, finally, this will be in English, or were they kind of like, oh, that's nice? I mean,
they are extremely humble people, and I think they were absolutely overjoyed. Actually, Vita Nostra is the second book to be published in English. There was their novel, The Scar, that is beautifully translated by Eleanor Huntington, and it came out from Tor, I believe, in maybe 2009.
Yeah.
Something like this. And that's an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous book. It's a part of It's absolutely, it's a stunning piece. It's not, it's definitely more of a fantasy genre, but it has the same, depth and the same nuances. It's a wonderful piece of work.
And I guess also connected to this question is, you had, like you say, you've had to make a lot of decisions and choices, about how to translate things in this book, because this book has lots of different kind of tones to it where, and lots of different things that are happening where we're always inside her mind, but she's, acting like a normal teenager over here. And then, trying to study these things that make no sense over there. And, was there any what kind of decisions did you have to make, while you were translating, kind of moving from one scene to another? Were there kind of things that you had to, did you have to stop after certain scenes,
I had to stop for a while and just put it aside for, sometimes for a couple of weeks, after all the scenes that have to do with things beginning to make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, and especially things where she's doing the exercises, because the language, and actually I didn't even think of that consciously. My editor, David Pomerico, he made the book shine. The book is what it is because of his editing, and he noticed the difference in tone. And so we went back from the regular kind of average life descriptions, because the way she lives in college is not that dissimilar from how I was in college or how you probably had your college experience, or years later how my kids are in college right now, going through basically the same experiences. So your typical dorm, your roommates, all this parties and the noise and all that is not that dissimilar. And the language it's written in is much kind of simpler and more really ordinary in a good way than the language of the education scenes. So there's a huge difference in tone. So when David pointed it out, I went back, and during the round of editing, I was much more self-aware. And so I put a lot more emphasis on those pages where the tone was different, and tried to make smoother transitions. But that was all under David's tutelage. I would not have thought of that. I wasn't really processing it as I was translating it.
Well, I have to say that as I've tried to explain to to some people, editors, they can really see it. It's really sometimes just having another pair of eyes. You write a book or you translate, and someone else reads it and they notice something that is hard for you to see because you're so in it.
Absolutely. And there's, they're professional editors. It's partly his incredible love for this book and his passion for it is one thing, but then he's just better at wordsmithing, and he's better at picking up things that will sound better on audio, which I didn't even consider. So I will never forgive myself for that. And I even had to email Jessica Ball, who is the actress who did the beautiful narration of Vita Nostra. She's brilliant. But I had to apologize for putting she scythe into a sentence. I literally put that in and try saying that. And she managed somehow to enunciate that one. So I couldn't forgive myself for doing that. But, I didn't think of that.
Yeah, the voice actors. Whew.
Yeah, no, she's incredible. Yeah.
It's much harder than I thought. I thought, what? You just read into a microphone. What's so hard about it? But yeah.
It's incredibly difficult. And now I'm so much more aware, now that I have a little bit of experience, and that I'm much more aware of how the sentence would sound if you actually say it out loud versus just seeing it on the page.
Yeah. I know some translators say that when they translate, they will write it out, then they will read it aloud.
Yeah, I try to do that.
I never do that. I mean, I don't do that, but then again, I'm not a like book length manuscript translating kind of girl. I do the shorter stuff.
Well, I don't think it matters. The size in this particular case doesn't matter. I think it's just the quality of your writing. But you're translating it into your native language. I'm constantly doubting myself. I drop articles like you wouldn't believe in writing.
That's the thing that I found fascinating learning Russian, that there are no articles, and you don't need them in Russian. You just don't.
No, not at all. Well, trust me, Americans don't need them either. For some reason, you insist on using that. There's no point to articles. I know.
And I know, I have to say, like, I thought about it, and I thought, why do we even use them? And then when I drop them sometimes, just because I use lots of slang and, like, shortcuts, and I think it actually hurts my internal ear.
Exactly. Yes. And that's why I try, I can't read the entire novel to myself, but I will occasionally, if I doubt a sentence, I will definitely read that out loud. And then I pick up on all the dropped articles and all the stuff that I miss.
And it's only because I grew up speaking English that I have that, like, that inner, if I moved
innate ability.
Right, like, cause if I moved to Russia, I would probably constantly be like, wait, what am I supposed to do with the articles? Am I supposed to use them? Am I not supposed to use them? I don't know.
Well, Russian doesn't have articles, but they have their challenges and the verb tenses that will kill you and all that. So it's a different challenge. But yeah, articles I have never met a single Russian who will get the articles right, no matter when you come.
And I love when because I actually had two Russian piano teachers, of course, and they both they were not even bothering with the articles, and I just loved it. I was like, this is great. I love your accent. I love the way you talk. It's just so great. And yeah, it was because of them that I decided to learn Russian. Because I thought, I've been, and also like the girls who were the nicest girls in my high school were all from, Ukraine, Romania, Poland, they were like, I would hang out with them, and they moved back and forth between Russian and English constantly. And I would walk down the halls with them not knowing half of what they were saying, but that's fine. And, and then they'd be like, calling each other by, nicknames and things. And I had no idea what they were talking about. And, I finally would ask, like, who is Ira? Like, I don't understand. And they were like, well, that's short for Irina. Like, right. And I'm like, who's Lenichka? And it's like, me. I'm Lenichka. I was like, no, you're Yelena. She's like, yeah.
Actually, that was one of the decisions that I made, and I'm kind of regretting it a little bit because in the book, Sasha has, a gazillion different names. Everybody calls her something different. Her mother says Sashenka, and, and you have the official Alexandra, and then everybody else calls her Sashka. And so, and her, and their teachers are, they constantly switch between the more formal version, depending if she's screwing up again. They call her more formal. But it makes sense to me, but it would not make sense to anyone who's not familiar with the Russian names. And so I made that decision. I kept Alexandra for the more official documents. It comes up a couple of times, like when she's accepted to Torpa and things like that. But the rest I just kept as Sasha. Because, I didn't want anyone to have to come up with like this table of names and who is who. And
you mean like in the Dostoevsky and the
right, yeah,
and the Tolstoy and the
16 different versions of the same name. Yes, I think it's just it doesn't carry the same emotional punch to Americans, to English language audience, and so I decided to just scrap that.
Because in English, it seems like people have. Yeah, they've got their like official name, and then there's a nickname, and it's usually just those two. But there can be like for Svetlana, like this one girl was called like 5 different names because Sveta, Lana, right. And and that's really interesting. But like, I'm thinking back on my reading of, the classic, Crime and Punishment. And I was so confused about who was who.
But the thing is that even if you knew who all these people were, all this, different versions, you didn't know what the emotion behind all those names was. You didn't know when it was sarcastic or when it was gentle, or when it was loving. And so then why are you doing this? Just to stay true to the original? That doesn't make sense. So that's one of the decisions that I made.
Well, that's really interesting because I don't really know what other people's like if finding the classics and, reading like Russian classics is a thing that, people are still doing in their teen years. Like, I knew a lot of people who did that, we were teenagers, but, the book market, has changed so radically that I don't know if people are reading those or if they're reading more young adult now because it's marketed to them, and it seems to be an older audience for young adult. Whereas when I was young adult, I was like, okay, I read all these kind of, for younger readers books, and now I'm going to move on to the classics. And I didn't understand half of what I was reading, but I was like, I got to read Dostoevsky. I'm already 15. What's wrong with me?
How could you go through life without reading Dostoevsky? I don't know. I'm much more, I think by raising my own kids, I'm much more relaxed about it. We read for information. And I'm older than you, and my generation, especially people who grew up in Russia, we read for information. It was the way we learned about the world. This generation, I think, and I'm going to sound extremely old, but this generation is so completely different in the way they get information, process it. And, if they read for fun, and thank God, that's how I read now. I have all these other ways of getting information, and I read for fun, for pleasure. So, and I don't only read fantasy, I read other stuff, but I read, well, my definition of pleasure is a little different from most people. I read like A Little Life for pleasure several times in a row and suffer through every page, but that's my way. I like the cathartic feeling of it, and I like when things completely deteriorate, and I like opera when everybody dies.
Exactly, so, right.
But the more the better, the worse the situation is, the more
people plunging knives into their chest, the better. Yeah,
exactly. Screaming in C minor. But I just think that if the kids or anybody under 30, let's say, if they read for pleasure, and thank God. And that's wonderful. And I think that you can't really learn a lot about the world from Vita Nostra, but it's going to be quite a ride.
It's so different.
It's emotional and it's cerebral. And if they read it for fun, fantastic. That's all we can ask for.
Well, it's on it's accessible on my shelves to my 7-year-olds, like almost 7-year-olds.
It might be a bit early, a little.
They could theoretically.
They want to wait like about 3-4 years.
Take it down and start reading it. One of them started reading John Galsworthy, and he was like, I don't even, like, what? And then I looked over his shoulder and I was like, this is barely even English to my 6-year-olds. Like, it's like a different English, he's like, I don't even, what is this word? It's English, but it doesn't make any sense.
I think, and as any normal Russian, I'm going to boast and say I read it at 12, but then I read the translation, and Russian school of translation was very different. It's very, it's very free and creative about its approaches. Mm-hmm. That's a nice way to put it, but the way they translated was really not being true to the original was not the point. So it was made much more accessible, and if a paragraph didn't make sense to a Russian reader, they would just skip it. And a Russian Holden Caulfield is much nicer than the English-speaking one.
I would love to read that.
He's so charming.
Really?
So sympathetic.
Oh, that's
funny. I was actually shocked when I read Catcher in the Rye in English.
That is so, wow, that is not the same book at all.
No, because it makes things so different, and he's kind of a lost soul, but he's not prickly or obnoxious. He's just a sweet boy who can't find love, and it's a little different. Well, at least that's how I read it at, whatever, 14, 15.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. Cause, thinking about, I always think kind of like large theme, like, well, when you translate something from one language into another, it's like translating one culture into another. But yes, some very like, culturally specific novels. What happens,
And things like, John Steinbeck is so much more well known and more read in Russia. And I think Hemingway is probably the same way. So they're just more accessible, I think, or were made more accessible to Russians. And same Goltziwarsi. We all read him. It was sort of, a household book.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and we just, strangely enough, the Russians know those authors better than you guys.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Galsworthy. Like,
Yeah.
I think I heard his name like here and there, but never really read him until I was in my late 20s.
Yeah, and he was on my bookshelf at home, and I grew up with him and read all that. Yeah, so yeah, but the school. That's why I'm so happy that there are people passionate about translation in the States, because, well, we don't get enough of it. We don't get enough Scandinavian literature. We don't get enough German or even Russian, and that's why it's so incredible to see all this, people who are so incredibly passionate about it.
Yeah.
And know that there's an audience, and there are people who are trying to push more foreign literature into this environment and to publishing. And it's really heartwarming to me.
Yeah, it's great. And oh my God, I could talk to you about this for like 5 hours.
I know, at least, yeah.
But I'm going to ask you one more question, which is, can you tell us about your current and future projects, and specifically Daughter from the Dark?
Daughter from the Dark,
yes.
There are a couple of things that I just finished working on. So Daughter from the Dark is another Dichenko novel. It's not related to Vita Nostra. It's a separate novel. It's a standalone. And it is, in Russian, it's called Alena and Aspirin. So Alena is a name of a girl, and Aspirin is a nickname of the other character. And it is, I think, for those who loved Vita Nostra but felt like it was a little too painful for the brain, I think it's going to be really good, because it has all the aspects of Vita Nostra, a little bit of a fantasy setup, but the depths of the characters and the transformation and all that is there, emotional transformation. It's all there, but it's a little lighter on the metaphysics. So it doesn't hurt as much to read it. So it's a beautiful, absolutely stunning novel, but it's not as heavy on the education process as Vita Nostra. So it's a little bit more of a, I don't want to say traditional, but it's definitely lighter reading. And it's also shorter, so it's not as difficult. You don't have to walk away from it. If you do, it's only because you're going to be emotionally drained by the end of it. So that's coming out on February 11th of next year, and I can't wait. It's wonderful. Same genre, same sort of urban. I guess there are elements of horror in it, but again, not really the point.
Right,
the point
right.
is the character development. And another thing that is, it does not have a publication date, and the only thing I can tell you is the more people buy Vita Nostra and Daughter from the Dark, the sooner that publication date will happen. But I did just finish the translation of the novel that is a loose sequel to Vita Nostra. So I got to be very careful about it. It's from the same cycle called Metamorphosis. It's the same cycle, but it's not a continuation of Sasha's story. So I don't want to get anyone's hopes up, because I've been asked many times, is the sequel going to tell me what happened? It's not. It's not. Sasha is mentioned, but she's not really a character in this. It's a completely different novel that can be a completely standalone adventure, but it does answer some of the questions of Vita Nostra. It has something to do with Sasha. That's all I can tell you.
Oh, exciting!
Yeah, I don't want to. No spoilers.
Is it long? Is it long as Vita Nostra?
No, it's not. No. It's shorter, and it's a little bit more. I think of it as a little bit closer to young adult.
Mm-hmm.
A little, but it has a little bit of a Lord of the Flies flavor to it.
I like it.
I can't really, I know you're supposed to compare it to things, but I can't really, because their books just don't get really easily compared to anything.
Yeah, they're very much there. I mean, just reading this one, I'm like, yeah, it's its own thing. It's like in certain other, like in French books, like Antoine Volodine, he's his own thing. Like,
right.
When I've written about French SF in translation, it's like these guys, and then Volodine over there, he's just doing his thing.
Well, yeah, I guess Murakami is the closest thing I can think of, but it's probably, I just finished Killing Commendatori, so it's probably why he's in my mind.
Yeah. I haven't gotten to that one yet, but I've read a bunch of it. Yeah. He makes your brain work less hard than like Vita Nostra.
a little, but I think that both The Daughter from the Dark and The Migrant have all the good parts of Vita Nostra, but they are just a little lighter. Like, there's a part of Vita Nostra that I love, and it's really the middle part that's all about that process of learning.
Yeah.
And it's not everyone's cup of tea. I loved it, and I think it belongs in there, but I know that, it's probably, it's heavy, it's hard to read. It's extremely rewarding, but it's challenging.
You got to work for your knowledge,
Well, you got to be a total geek to like to read about people reading. And learning. So, I admit it. But,
yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, congratulations on
Thank you.
all of these projects, and definitely we need to talk again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was incredibly fun.
Thank you for coming on, and keep us updated on Twitter and
absolutely
anywhere else about the projects. And I look forward to reading all of the translations that you're going to give us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for listening to Speculative Fiction in Translation, a member of the Skiffy and Fanty Network, hosted by Rachel Cordasco and Daniel Hauser. If you would like to contact the Speculative Fiction in Translation podcast directly, please do so at rachel@sfintranslation.com, or you can visit sfintranslation.com. Additionally, you can find Rachel on Twitter at rcordas and Daniel at read1000lives. To find out more about the podcasts on the Skiffy and Fanty Network, please visit us at skiffyandfanty.com. If you would like to support the network, you can do so at patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. To keep up to date on everything that is happening at the Skiffy and Fanty Network, please visit skiffyandfanty.com/newsletter. The music from this podcast is No Disclaimer by Jesse Spillane. To find more about this music, please visit freemusicarchive.org.